Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome to What She Said, the heartbeat of Canadian women's voices, with me, your host, Candace Sampson. Here, we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered stories and triumphs of women from coast to coast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement where empowerment and education collide and where mansplaining is shown the door. We're here to celebrate, uplift, and echo you. So get cozy, tune in, and let's embark on this journey together, exploring the rich tapestry of women's lives, their battles and victories, right here on What She Said. There is a crisis unfolding across the country, one that touches the core of our humanity and challenges the fabric of our society. It's the state of our healthcare system, especially its impact on the most vulnerable among us, our seniors. We are at a crossroads where the principles of compassion and care that should define our healthcare are being overshadowed by inefficiency and neglect. It's a reality that many of us may one day face, and for some, that day has already come. A reality that's not just disappointing, but downright heartbreaking. The stories are all around us, tales of vibrant lives diminished by a system struggling to uphold its promise. And it's these stories that bring us face to face with the human cost of our healthcare system's shortcomings. It's not a matter of policies or politics. It's about the very essence of who we are and who we aspire to be as a society. Enter Elizabeth Payne, a name some may recognize from her incisive healthcare journalism, a voice that has long echoed the complexities and challenges within our healthcare system. But recently, Elizabeth's professional world collided with her personal life in the most profound way, shedding light on the systemic issues through the lens of personal loss and resilience. Her poignant story detailing her father's harrowing journey through the healthcare system and published across Postmedia is a powerful testament to the urgent need for change. It's this unique perspective forged in the crucible of personal experience and professional insight that Elizabeth brings to our conversation today. So as we dive into this discussion, let's remember that behind every statistic, every policy debate, there's a human story waiting to be told, waiting to be heard. So without further ado, meet Elizabeth Payne. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Your article that was published in the Ottawa Citizen recently poignantly shares your father's story and its impact on your family. Can you walk us through what happened to your father and how the initial incident led to a series of healthcare challenges?
Yes. So my dad, first I'll say this is a very, very common story. So very sadly, my dad was living on his own. My mom passed away 5 years earlier. He was very independent, very stubborn. We would have liked him to be in a smaller place, but he remained where he was. He was driving, lived in a small town, was getting by. He had a little help coming in. And he made a trip to the bank. One day he drove there, liked to go to the bank a lot. They knew him there well. And while he was standing in line, he fell, as simple as that. And many people there knew him. They called an ambulance for him. And interestingly, in this story, the hospital he went to was 30 kilometers away because the hospital in town the emergency had been shut down a few years earlier. So he headed down the highway to the hospital, got in and waited in line in his gurney, as many people do. And so began, the doors closed, and what began was a whole series of the sort of circumstances that worsened the condition he was in.
Really, from the get-go, this was a system broken, that, the ER was closed in the town. Can you remind me what year this happened again, when this all started?
Yeah, this was in 2022, so into the pandemic, a couple of years in. The hospital in town had been closed earlier, amalgamation. There remained an urgent care, that since the hours have been shut down there somewhat. But yeah, so the hospital down the road was the one he had to go to.
So when he fell, he broke his arm, correct?
That's right. Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, so we learned, after his weight, he got into emergency and learned he had broken his upper arm. And he didn't have a head injury, which of course we worried about. He seemed otherwise to be fine. So it didn't seem like such a terrible injury, but they started investigating. When he got there, he had an extremely low heart rate, and rightly that was of concern. So he was immediately hooked up to all sorts of monitors to monitor his heart rate, keep an eye on what was going on. So he got there, and this guy who had, driven his car that day was suddenly bedbound. And he was strapped to the bed because once he got over the initial sort of adrenaline rush of it all, he wanted to get out of there as fast as he could, and he couldn't.
And so what happened to his health then, from the time he was admitted into the hospital? You mentioned that there was just sort of this series of mistakes and I suppose budget cuts that prevented proper care for him. What happened to his health as you watched this happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole number of things. And it was, to me, it just struck me because I've been writing about these as a health reporter, about overcrowded emergency departments because hospital beds are full and there's no place to move people, often older people like my dad. So there's long lineups, they're packed, about nursing shortages and possibly understaffing before nursing shortages, issues like infection control, the fact that there are outbreaks going on. So all those things he began to encounter, first from getting right into the emergency room and having to wait, and then being put in a room with curtains around him, in a very noisy, somewhat chaotic, overly busy emergency department, with bright fluorescent lights shining down on him, and that was his room. And he was admitted to that room, which was a cubicle without walls. So all those things contributed to his inability to move. Really, there was no place to move in emergency. It was just it was overflowing with people and with not waste, but people trying to clear out the waste. And there wasn't a place to walk around. He was hooked up to monitors. And he began to show signs of delirium almost immediately, which is also a common kind of impact, particularly on older folks, that goes with injury and anxiety and stress of hospital stays. So that is another, like, all these chip away at his ability to be independent at some point. Eventually he was into a room and there was an outbreak in that room. So, things stopped, things kind of, you couldn't get up. You didn't have as much help. People were masked and gowned. So all of these chipped away at his ability to be mobile, and it doesn't take that long to lose your muscle mass when you're 90 years old.
And it wasn't just the physical deterioration, but there was also a big impact on his mental health, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, my dad was very independent. I think like many people that age, he wanted to stay in his home. He wanted to remain independent. And I think he kind of avoided, doctors in a way because of that, and I think when it started sinking in that he had no independence, he couldn't get out as he wanted to and get in his car. that, you become depressed, you become disoriented. It starts to sink in that you've lost your independence, you've lost your ability to make decisions for yourself. And people go through these delusions where they see things and hear things, where, a week before, that wasn't who my father was.
And from the time he broke his arm until the time he passed away, how long was that, Elizabeth?
It was just over a year, and most of that was spent, or about half of that was spent in the hospital system, and a little over half was spent in long-term care at the end of his life.
So you're a health reporter, as you mentioned. How did this very personal experience, did it reshape your understanding of the healthcare system or sort of solidify that understanding for you?
No, I wrote in my story that I thought I understood the health system. If you were writing about healthcare when the COVID pandemic came along, it was something like nothing you'd experienced before. And it was a time of intense focus and things going on. And that's what I was writing about. And then the subsequent years, and I had written lots about issues with staffing, about issues with infection control, about issues in emergency departments. I had done lots of stories, spoken to lots of people about hospitals and the stresses they were under. But I think I was seeing it on the macro level until my dad went into the hospital. I hadn't really seen what each of those little, you hear about them and they seem like bad experiences, but you don't see it as a continuum, that almost every day there's a little bit of that, and the way it chips away at a person's independence and their ability to ever get back to that independence.
Through your father's journey, you highlighted a lot of some systemic issues within the healthcare system, especially for the elderly. So based on your reporting and personal experience, what are the most pressing changes that need to happen right now for caring for aging patients?
Well, that's such a big question. I mean, my father's story was inside the hospital system. And I sort of cringe when I hear this, but in Ontario, and I think elsewhere, they're known as ALC, alternate level of care patients. And these are patients who are in acute care beds, but they don't need acute care. They need either to go to long-term care or rehab or somewhere else, but there's no place for them. So, they've been unkindly termed bed blockers in the past. And their majority of them are elderly folks, not all of them. So the health system should, and does in some way, do a better job of preventing getting those people into those beds in hospitals. But the fact is, that population is a large part of the hospital population. And in some cases, there's a sense that, this shouldn't be our problem. And maybe that's unfair. But, this isn't our real, these aren't our real patients. They're somehow, shouldn't be there. And in fact, they are there. Dr. Samir Sinha, a noted Canadian geriatrician who I spoke to, his take on it was that the Canadian hospital system was designed for 27-year-olds, which was the average age when it was designed. Now the average age is 72, and it hasn't adapted to meet those needs. And, the aging population is growing.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hi, I'm Steve Yerko.
And I'm Tara Sands. Now available from Maji Media is our new podcast, 4 Kids Flashback. 4Kids is the company who brought you the English dub of Pokemon in the late 90s and so many other shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Kirby, the infamous One Piece dub, and so many more.
We'll be talking to the people who worked at 4Kids. Actors, directors, writers, editors, producers, engineers, you get the point. And hopefully get the answers to questions both you and I have about the company.
I actually worked there as a voice actor on some of the shows.
And I was a kid watching the shows and remember way more than Tara does.
And thank God for that. Steve is actually a professional storyboard artist, which gives some really unique insights into anime and animation. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts. That's the number 4 Kids Flashback.
I was struck reading the article about, there's this disconnect between what we know is good for the patient and what actually happens for the patient, which is largely because of underfunding and, understaffing. What are the things that should have happened for your father?
Yeah.
I mean, let's just start with, obviously the emergency, I should say, being opened in town where he was would have been the first step. But what else should have happened?
Yeah, and that's a whole other part that I would like to talk about as well of the story, the sort of geopolitics of medicine. But what should have happened. I spoke to Dr. Samir Sinhan at his hospital at Mount Sinai in Toronto. They've pioneered something called ACE, acute care for the elderly, and their priority is to keep people moving. And that can happen anywhere. He claims you don't need a lot of staffing to do it. It's just more of a priority. And that could be getting people, just making sure they're not lying down, because lying down within 8 hours, an elderly person's skin can start to get damaged. And that can lead to pressure sores, which can lead to, very severe outcomes. So it's a matter of between having volunteers and staff who make that their priority, making sure patients get out of bed for meals, walk every day, have really limited their use of catheters, IVs, to give people fluids, which is often just done, whereas many people can pick up a glass and drink. So they do, and those things keep people from getting out of bed. They believe it's more important for people to get out of bed and walk around and not have those. So you might need someone there to help them with that. But those things make huge differences in how well people do in the health system. And it can be done anywhere. He says it's hard to redesign a system. And I think it is,
I think, though, reading your story, and I mentioned to you prior to this interview that, I have a very dear friend of mine, her father passed away from a pressure wound in the hospital. This is something that most people will go through with their parents at some point, but I think we are wholly unprepared for that moment when it comes. And so you mentioned the importance of advocacy for patients. How can families effectively advocate for their loved ones within the structure that we currently have? I mean, it feels difficult, but perhaps not impossible.
I think that's true. And I'm actually not sure I'm the expert on how to advocate, because I almost found in our experience, my dad was so much better off. There were a lot of us, we were around all the time, but it was almost as if something had, just gone before you could kind of digest what had happened. And so it can be very tough to advocate when there's not a lot of people around. It can be very tough to reach the people who make decisions. However, advocating makes a huge difference. They will listen to you. People are genuinely, those I have met who work in the health system are compassionate and want to do the best for patients. Sometimes, often, no, they can't do the best for patients. But if you, make a point about what your loved one needs and they can do that, they will do that. So it's unfortunate for people who don't have advocates.
How did you and your family cope during this time? Did you have support systems in place? Did you, because of the knowledge you had reporting on healthcare, did you have any information that was helpful to you during this time?
Well, we had each other. I think we were lucky. I have 3 sisters. We all eventually ended up, when none of us lived near my dad, we all ended up staying there. It was a small town. We knew lots of people in town who were also part of the support. Yeah. And I think I understood a little bit, my dad and his roommates at rehab all got COVID. We were able to push to make sure they got Paxlovid, which the elderly generally get. And they were, surprisingly to us, kind of reticent to give it to them, but they did. So I think that lessened their symptoms and helped prevent, worsening health issues. But yeah, it was, we had each other. It was tough. It's exhausting. It's exhausting watching someone when you're at the point when that there's no getting out. So it's very sad. And yeah, and my dad was in pain, and it's that it's not fun to see that. You try to distract him, really, which we did. So.
Pulling out sort of to that macro view again, you've been reporting on healthcare for how long?
Oh, long time, probably, I don't know, 15 years or so.
And in that time then, obviously I think this is a no-brainer. You've seen the healthcare system decline in Canada, but what are your feelings on how we are equipped for the aging we're seeing right now? We are seeing the boomers literally. This is going to be the next 10, 20 years. We're going to be watching this sort of influx into long-term care facilities, into hospitals. We have a shortage of doctors. How do we approach all that? How do we take care of this?
Yeah, I don't think we are prepared at all. There was a lot of focus on the long-term care system, of course, during the first year or so of the pandemic, during those horror stories about what some homes went through. Whether that has fixed that, I'm not sure. There's lots of new buildings going up, but then other ones are closing. So, I'm not sure that side of the story has been fixed, but the acute care is in crisis right now, and the number of elderly in it is an issue. I think the bigger picture is sort of the community supports for people. I mean, that's the thing. If you can get community supports, help in your home easily, you can stay home. And we know that. People have been talking about that for years and years, but it's just, the system is kind of overwhelmed right now. And perhaps, one of the stories I frequently cover is the sort of collapse of family health care. And I think for the elderly, that's actually a pretty important place to start. You might end up seeing a geriatrician for a specialty, but if you have a strong tie with a family clinic, I think that clinic has access to some care and home care. I think that makes a huge difference for people. That's not there right now.
It's interesting, my parents are aging, and we're having a lot of discussions right now about sort of where they will go, and will they live closer to me, and how are we going to work all this, and where will we live? And one of the things that came out about it is that we can't really move too far from where we are because they don't want to lose their family doctor. And there are millions of people across Ontario without a family doctor. The wait list is up to 8 years for some people. And so this is having impacts beyond even just, their health. It's limiting where we can move or live right now. And I think that's a big problem for people too.
I think that is. I mean, yeah, I think they're right to be concerned about their family physician. And one of the things that I think is a really undercovered story, down where my dad lives, it's, close enough, but far enough from the GTA that a lot of people have sold their houses in the GTA and moved down to the Niagara area, where it was, cheaper and a little more rural. So there's, nice housing developments where healthy retirees are moving by the dozens, and yet you think there is not like there's all these populations being drawn here, and there's just not a good hospital system nearby. And that happens everywhere, like, and all through the country. There's areas that are sort of trying to draw retirees, and just look at your choices for hospitals. They're not close, and the ones that are close are probably teetering right now. So it's tough. It's a real problem.
I mean, I know you've reported on, the Ebola vaccine. You look at a lot of different things, COVID-19. Do you ever look at systems that are doing healthcare for seniors right? Like, are there any countries that you know of that have a good grasp of this?
I haven't reported on that so much, but I know there have been reports on European countries that do a really good job with long-term care or retirement living, where there's a much more person-centered, and there's lots of work at local long-term care homes as well. Not lots, maybe, but some. There is an understanding of what makes a good retirement community. I mean, there's some co-ops across Canada that are doing that. There's some individuals. In fact, one of my former doctors and some friends have sort of set up a building where they live, the three of them, as they age, and it's made room for them to age and maybe have help in. There's lots of different ways people are doing that, but yeah, generally it's sort of the companies that are running the big businesses. The bottom line can be a problem in terms of how much care you get. I mean, I think there's a real push for better guidelines on how many hours a day people should get of care and that sort of thing, or how many nurses and our RPNs should be available. So there's lots that can be done. Some places do it. A lot of places do it better than us. Our long-term care did excessively poorly during the pandemic compared to other countries. So I think that shocked many people, how badly, how high the death rates were and how badly we did.
Do you think this is a question of, private healthcare? Private healthcare could do it better, or is it just because the public system is so underfunded?
Well, in long-term care, absolutely, that's not the case. There's lots of research from Canada and elsewhere showing that private long-term care, the outcomes are far worse. So there's no question. I mean, the long-term care my dad ended up in was municipally run, and it was pretty good. So not for profit and municipally run in this province do much better than the private care clinics. Generally, not always. There are always exceptions. But, throughout the pandemic, that was the case. There's been lots of research underscoring that.
Do you see any hopeful signs or initiatives out there that might lead to better care for elderly patients in the future right now, or is it just a mess?
Well, no, I don't think it's a mess. I think there's lots of people who know what works. Individuals know intrinsically what works as well. I mean, I think the move it and lose it or lose it motto has to just become something that people really understand with the elderly, and the elderly understand as well. I mean, I'd say the sad thing about my dad was that was his motto in life, perhaps, to his detriment at times even, but he firmly believed that a walk could fix anything, or he could get on his bike even, perhaps when maybe that wasn't so smart anymore. But he was kind of done in a system that just said, no, you're not moving. And, I'm like my dad. I also think a walk can fix many things, and I can't imagine that being denied to me if I was still able to do it.
What lessons would you like people to know about your experience if they're going to be going through this or are currently going through something like this? What would you share with them?
Well, I mean, what I hope my story shared Because, as I say, often in healthcare, you write about these exceptional cases, these stories of people who have these unbelievable health challenges. My dad's story was a story that happens every day in this country, in every hospital. I think what I have heard from people, and I think what I hope, is that it put a human face on this population that gets, overlooked, becomes sort of dehumanized through the system because they can't deal with them. So as everyone knows individually, these are humans, and I hope to do that. And also, draw attention to something that is so common that often it's not seen as an issue, and it should not be happening. I mean, it's contributing to loss of mobility, loss of independence, even death in many cases. So it shouldn't be happening.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. I'm going to link to the article you wrote in the Ottawa Citizen. Was it published anywhere else, or was it across all Post media?
It was across Post media.
Okay,
yep.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So I will put the link to that on the website when this goes live. Thank you for joining me. Where can people follow along with your health reporting?
At the Ottawa Citizen, which is theottawacitizen.com. I'm also on Twitter at EG Payne. So you should find me there. But Post Media, also throughout the Post Media chain, my stories are often published.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for joining me today, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
If today's podcast resonated with you, spread the word and share the inspiration. Don't forget to hit subscribe on What She Said across your favorite podcast platforms. Crave more? Join my vibrant community by signing up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com, and let's get social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at What She Said Talk. Dive into my world a little deeper on TikTok and Threads at Candace Said. And for those who love the airwaves, catch me weekly on 105.9 The Region, Blast the Radio, and 107.7 Pulse FM. Until next time, keep making waves, and remember, your voice matters.
What happens when we play outside? We become healthier, both mentally and physically. We become more creative and more focused. We connect with nature, each other, and ourselves. Let's Take This Outside, a new podcast hosted by me, Marianne Iveson, an aspiring outdoor athlete and nature lover. I speak to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about their connection to nature, how it affects their performance, and everyday life. Let's Take This Outside, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and at letstakethisoutside.ca.
It is your favorite girl. That's right, it's the Allie Mars, the one and the only. Everyone else just ain't me. I am the host of Welcome to Mars, a lifestyle podcast where nothing is off the table. I have come a long way from sex and dating, and have transformed the new vibe to all things lifestyle. We still talk sex, but I'm more interested in the journey, where people have come from, how they made it, and where they're going. Subscribe or follow to a brand new look and a brand new era. Welcome to Mars.
Subscribe or follow on Apple, Spotify, Google, or at thealliemars.com.
Because even with the new look, I'm still that same bitch you love to hate.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.